Lena approaches the guest list table, her heels clicking sharply against the polished marble. The attendant looks up, and for a split second, there's hesitation in her eyes. A quick glance at the paper and then back to Lena. "Your name, ma?" "Lena Stone." "Sorry, ma'am," the attendant says coldly. "Your name isn't on the list." Lena blinks. There's no mistake. She checks the invitation again. It's not a clerical error. She knows this. "I'm sorry. There must be some mistake. I'm supposed to be here," Lena says, her voice calm but firm. The attendant doesn't look up. "You'll have to wait outside." Those words hit Lena like thunderstrike. But what did you think could have caused this? Stay tuned to find out. Welcome to Stories with Mr. Gray. If you love uncovering the truth and standing up for justice, hit subscribe, like and drop the flag of your country in the comments below. The glittering lights of the gala hall cast an almost magical glow over the guests, their laughter and chatter filling the air. Elegant gowns swirled across the polished marble floor, while glasses of champagne sparkled in the hands of the elite. Everything about the event screamed exclusivity. This was where the city's wealthiest and most powerful came to make connections, to flaunt their success, and to donate to a cause that could make them feel even more important. But for Lena, tonight had taken a sharp turn. She had approached the guest list table with confidence, ready to enjoy the evening. But now, as the attendant glanced at her invitation with a cold, dismissive expression, Lena's stomach tightened. "Sorry, ma'am," the attendant said flatly, her voice devoid of any warmth. "Your name isn't on the list." Lena blinked. The invitation in her hand felt suddenly heavy, her heartbeat quickening. She checked the paper again. No mistake. She was certain of it. "I'm sorry. There must be some mistake. I'm supposed to be here," Lena said, her voice controlled, though the frustration began to crawl up her throat. The attendant didn't bother to make eye contact. "You'll have to wait outside." Outside. The words echoed in her mind as she stood there, feeling her cheeks flush with embarrassment. But before she could push further, she felt the cold eyes of other guests watching her, whispering. A well-dressed man walked past, glancing at Lena with an exaggerated look of disdain. "They must have mixed up the invitations again," he said, loud enough for her to hear. "I wouldn't expect her to be invited, though. Not sure what kind of people they're letting in these days." Lena stiffened, the sting of his words sharp. The man's words were directed at her, but his gaze was trained on her clothes, her appearance. A subtle but clear message: you don't belong here. Another woman, draped in a shimmering gown, muttered as she passed. "I think she's in the wrong place. They're probably not letting in everyone who claims they know someone. Are they?" Lena clenched her fists, the humiliation spreading through her veins. She had worked too hard for too long to be reduced to whispers and sideways glances from people who thought they had the right to decide who was worthy. Lena stayed silent, her heart pounding in her chest, as more guests, some familiar, some strangers, walked past her, casting judgmental looks and muttering under their breath. No one offered help. No one stepped in to correct the situation. Instead, they glanced at her with barely concealed disdain, assuming she was just another unimportant guest trying to sneak in. Each whisper, each look, added to the weight on her shoulders. It felt as if she was sinking deeper, her pride slowly being stripped away in front of people who thought they were so much better. Just as she was about to make another attempt to clarify the situation, the sound of a low, calm voice interrupted her thoughts. "Is there a problem here?" Lena's breath caught in her throat as she turned. There he was, Dominic, her husband. He stood at the entrance, his presence immediately commanding the room. His eyes scanned the space with a kind of quiet confidence that made the air in the room shift. The whispers stopped, and the attention turned to him. Lena's relief was instant, but what came next shocked everyone in the room. Dominic's gaze flickered to the attendant, who had now gone pale. Without skipping a beat, he smiled slightly and addressed the crowd. his voice carrying with an effortless authority. "Let me make something clear," he said, turning to Lena with a soft smile. "This is my wife." The room went dead silent. The attendant's face went ghostly pale as she recognized who had just walked in. The whispers started again. Only now, they were full of shock and disbelief. This man wasn't just anyone. He was Dominic Stone, one of the wealthiest and most influential men in the city. And he had just called Lena his wife. The sudden recognition was enough to make the air feel thicker. The guests, who moments ago had looked down on her, were now exchanging nervous glances, quickly realizing the mistake they had just made. Lena stood tall, feeling the weight of their gazes now shifting from judgment to surprise. But her face remained calm, the humiliation starting to fade as her husband's presence shielded her from the sting. The tension in the room was palpable, the shock hanging thick in the air like a cloud. Dominic stood at the entrance, his calm demeanor contrasting with the frantic energy of the room. The guests, still processing the realization of who Lena was, now shifted their attention from Lena's supposed mistake to Dominic, trying to mask their embarrassment. Lena's heart was still pounding in her chest, but now it was from the shock of the sudden change. What had moments ago felt like the ultimate rejection now shifted into something completely different. Dominic glanced at Lena, his eyes softening for just a moment. He took a step toward her, the room clearing a path as though they couldn't quite look away. The whispers that had once been sharp and pointed were now replaced with murmurings of curiosity and confusion. "Baby, you okay?" Dominic's voice was low, only for her ears, but it cut through the tension like a sharp blade. He reached for her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. Lena nodded, her lips curving into a small smile. "I'm fine," she said, her voice steady, though her heart still raced. She wasn't just fine, she was empowered. The humiliation had morphed into an unexpected moment of victory, and she was starting to feel it. The receptionist, who had been frozen at her post, blinked rapidly, trying to recover. I apologize, sir. I wasn't aware that she is Mrs. Stone." "Really?" Dominic interrupted smoothly, his gaze never leaving her. He turned to Lena, his smile widening just slightly. "Let's not waste any more time here, darling. These people clearly don't understand the value of a guest with a real invitation." As he spoke, the realization hit the organizers and the guests around them all at once. They had just humiliated not just any woman, but the owner of the very venue they were using to host this prestigious fundraising event. They tried to backpedal, to smooth things over, but it was too late. The damage was done. The guests were already whispering about the mistake they had made, their expressions now a mix of embarrassment and confusion. "Excuse us," Dominic said, his tone final, taking Lena by the hand and leading her toward the heart of the event. Lena could feel the eyes of the room on her, no longer full of judgment, but full of a different kind of realization. It was as though they were seeing her for the first time, and what they saw wasn't someone to be discarded or underestimated. It was someone powerful, someone with the ability to disrupt everything in this room with a single word. Dominic and Lena walked together, their presence undeniable, as the hum of whispers began to spread through the room like wildfire. It wasn't long before the event's organizers, realizing the gravity of their mistake, scrambled to try to save face. They approached the couple, their steps hurried and uneasy. "Mr. Stone," one of the organizers said nervously, "we're terribly sorry for the misunderstanding. We would never have. We didn't realize." Dominic turned to face him, his expression unwavering. "No, of course you didn't. It's easy to forget that some people have more power in this city than just their names on a list." The organizer swallowed, his face flushed. He stammered, trying to regain his composure, but the damage was irreversible. The other guests had already begun to notice the shift in the atmosphere. Some of them who had once been smug and aloof now looked genuinely uncomfortable, understanding all too well how close they had come to making a very public mistake. Lena stood still, her gaze cool and composed, But inside, a quiet pride swelled. She had been tested, pushed to the edge of humiliation, and now she stood unbroken, with a husband who knew exactly when to step in. As Dominic led her toward a secluded corner of the event, he leaned in slightly, his voice just above a whisper. "Are you all right?" Lena looked up at him, her eyes steady. "I'm fine now." Dominic's lips curved into a faint smile. "Good, because they won't forget tonight." The room was buzzing with whispers and uncertain glances. The tension was thick, and as Lena and Dominic walked through the crowd, they couldn't help but notice how the elite guests now avoided their gaze. Where once there had been whispers of judgment, now there was only discomfort. Lena had been treated as an outsider, but the moment Dominic had spoken, everything changed. He had stepped into the room with a quiet authority that made the whispers falter, but his next words would seal the deal. Dominic glanced around, his eyes scanning the room. The event organizers, who had been scrambling to save face, were still caught in the wake of their blunder. Their faces were flushed with embarrassment, trying to recover the situation. But they knew they were on borrowed time. Lena stood beside him, her posture regal, but there was something different now. She wasn't just the wife of a billionaire. She was someone who commanded respect. Dominic, sensing the shift in the air, took a step closer to one of the organizers who had approached them, his voice steady and controlled, carrying just enough weight to make everyone listen. "I'm sure you're aware by now, but my wife." He glanced at Lena, his eyes softening just slightly before turning back to the man, "owns this venue." The words hung in the air, and for a split second, there was complete silence. The organizer's eyes widened in disbelief. He had been so sure that Lena was just another random guest trying to sneak into the event. But now, the power in the room had shifted entirely. Dominic took another step forward, his voice even lower but laced with cold authority. "And she wasn't just a guest tonight." He paused for effect, letting his words sink in. "She had intended to make a rather large donation to your cause. $500,000 to be exact." Lena felt her chest tighten at the mention of the donation. That amount had been set aside for the night, for the cause, for the people in this room who had come to make a difference. But it was no longer going to happen. Dominic's gaze never wavered as he continued. "But after the way my wife has been treated tonight, I think that money will be better spent elsewhere." The room seemed to freeze. The organizer opened his mouth, but no words came out. The guests, now fully aware of the gravity of the situation, exchanged uneasy glances, murmuring among themselves. Lena stood still, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to speak. Dominic's words had already said everything she needed them to. Dominic wasn't finished yet. He turned back to Lena with a small, knowing smile. "You don't owe them anything," he said softly, his voice only for her ears. "They've shown exactly who they are." Lena's gaze flickered to the guests around them, her heart still pounding with the sting of the earlier treatment. But now it wasn't about the sting. It was about the power they'd forgotten she had, the power she'd just reclaimed. "I'm done," she said quietly, turning back toward the exit. "Let them figure out the rest." As Lena and Dominic made their way toward the exit, the whispers grew louder. The event organizers, still stunned by Dominic's revelation, were left scrambling, their words stumbling over each other as they tried to salvage what remained of the evening. But it was too late, the damage had been done. Lena kept her posture straight, her head held high. She didn't look back. Every eye in the room was now on them, and they could feel the weight of the gazes, the curiosity, and the sudden shift in the room's energy. Once, Lena had been invisible to these people. Now, she was the only person they could think about. The guests, who had once looked down upon her, now looked at her with a mix of guilt and regret. Some even tried to approach, but none dared to make a move without waiting for Dominic's approval. The once eloquent, confident voices of the elite were now reduced to hushed conversations, trying to piece together the full story of what had just happened. As they reached the door, one of the organizers, who had been visibly shaken, approached them. His expression was strained, but he had no choice but to offer a forced apology. "Mr. and Mrs. Stone, please, let us make it right. We never meant for this to happen. Please." He hesitated, clearly struggling to find the right words. "You know we value your support. Please allow us to make amends." Dominic didn't even look at him. He gave a brief nod to Lena, silently telling her she didn't need to respond. But it was clear. The apology, however sincere, would never be enough. Lena's eyes never left the exit. She spoke over her shoulder, her voice low but full of authority. "You had your chance to respect me. It's too late now." The organizer stammered, but Dominic stepped forward, his eyes icy. "They'll remember this mistake," he said, his voice calm yet filled with finality. "And next time they'll remember to treat people equally, not based on skin color." With that, they stepped outside the ballroom, leaving the chaos behind them. The cool night air hit Lena's face, and for the first time that evening, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. The weight of the judgment, the whispers, the rejection, they all melted away as she took a deep breath. Dominic walked beside her, his presence like a shield, but his quiet satisfaction was evident in the way he looked at her. "How do you feel?" he asked softly, his hand brushing against hers. Lena paused, her gaze fixed on the distant skyline of the city. The lights twinkled like stars, but now, everything felt different. She felt different. "I feel," Lena started, her voice thoughtful, "I feel like I finally let them know who I am, who we are." Dominic smiled, his hand resting on her shoulder as they walked toward the car. "You've always known who you are, Lena. They just needed a reminder." As the car pulled up to take them away, Lena's hand rested against the door, her thoughts swirling. Dominic sat quietly beside her, sensing her internal struggle. He knew that look in her eyes, the moment before she made a decision. But just as the car began to move, Lena stopped him with a raised hand. She turned to him, her gaze determined. "I'm going back inside." Dominic furrowed his brow, clearly surprised. "Lena, no, let me," she interrupted, her voice firm. "I'm not leaving this night with them thinking they've won. I'll make my donation, but they'll understand that not all black women are just black." Dominic studied her for a moment, then gave a slight nod. He could see the fire in her eyes. He knew she was about to make a statement, not just for herself but for all the women who had been overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed. As the car came to a stop, Lena stepped out, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement as she walked back toward the venue. Dominic followed closely behind, but Lena held up a hand to stop him. "No," she said softly, her tone resolute. "This is something I need to do on my own." The event's entrance was still lit with the same sparkling glow, but now it seemed a bit dimmer. As she stepped through the doors once again, the room went silent. The guests, who had been trying to recover from their earlier embarrassment, looked up at her, some with hesitation, others with awe. Lena moved through the crowd without a word, her presence commanding the attention of everyone around her. She walked straight to the donation table, where the event organizers were still scrambling to regain their composure. The head organizer, still visibly shaken from earlier, looked up as Lena approached. His eyes widened slightly, but he quickly composed himself. "Mrs. Stone, we didn't expect you to return." Lena stood in front of him, her posture straight, her gaze unwavering. "I'm here to make my donation," she said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of the moment. $500,000. The room went still. A few of the guests, who had been whispering earlier, exchanged confused glances. Some didn't understand why she had left in the first place, and now they were watching her with a mixture of awe and discomfort. "I had intended to donate this earlier tonight," Lena continued, her gaze sharp. "But after the way I was treated, I thought better of it. But now /" Now I'm giving it to remind you that not all black women are just black, and not all of us are here to be overlooked and underestimated. We can own the room just as easily as we can leave it." Her words hung in the air like a challenge, and the weight of her statement resonated in the silence that followed. Lena wasn't just making a donation. She was claiming her place in this space. She was saying that her value didn't come from their acceptance. It came from who she was. The head organizer nodded, trying to hide his shock but failing to mask the hint of fear in his eyes. "Of course, Mrs. Stone," he stammered, stepping back as she handed over the check. "We truly appreciate your generosity." Lena didn't flinch. She didn't respond with a forced smile or empty pleasantries. She simply nodded, turned, and walked away. As she reached the door, she paused for a moment, letting the full weight of the room's gaze fall on her. Then, with quiet confidence, she stepped out, leaving them with more than just a donation. She had left them with a lesson. As the door closed behind her, the muffled sound of voices and whispers lingered in the air again. The room remained still for a few moments, as if no one quite knew what to do with the sudden shift in the evening's narrative. Inside the ballroom, the guests exchanged uncertain glances, the realization sinking in that they had just witnessed something rare. A woman who was unapologetically herself, unwilling to bend to anyone's expectations. Lena hadn't just made a donation. She had redefined the evening, turning a moment of humiliation into an unmistakable declaration of power. Dominic stood at the exit, watching her walk toward the car with grace and dignity. He smiled to himself, knowing how much more this evening had meant for Lena than anyone could understand. As the car pulled away from the venue, the glow of the gala grew distant, but the weight of what had just happened lingered in the city air. Lena sat back in her. "You did more than just make them regret it," he said quietly, his voice filled with admiration. "You changed the game." Lena glanced at him, a faint smile playing on her lips. "I didn't do it for them," she said softly. "I did it for every woman they've ever overlooked, every black woman they've ever underestimated. They'll never forget tonight." Dominic squeezed her hand, his gaze locked on hers. "They won't, and neither will anyone else." As they drove through the city, Lena leaned her head against the window, watching the world pass by. The lights of the city blinked like distant stars, but she felt different now. She had taken back her power, quietly, but with undeniable force. The world had just been reminded that Lena Stone was not someone to be overlooked. Not anymore. And as for the fundraising event, it would go down in history, not just for the money raised, but for the woman who had made her own statement in a room full of people who thought they had the power. They would remember that night forever, and they would never forget the lesson she had taught them. That true power is not given. It is earned, and no one could take that from her. Lena didn't let anyone define her worth, and neither should you. If you've ever felt overlooked or underestimated, remember that your power is yours to claim. Don't wait for others to give you respect. Demand it. If you believe in standing strong, in changing the game, and in making your voice heard, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this story. Let's show the world that we won't be silenced. And if you've ever been in a situation where you had to stand up for yourself, drop a comment below. Let us know how you took back your power. Together, we can make sure no one ever gets erased again. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.